the most common mistakes / problems that we see when we're dealing with luxury brands, and then we're going to present to you how we would solve those problems and why you should be doing it, and essentially how you're able to kind of turn things around within a 30-day time period. So we're going to pack quite a lot into the next 30 minutes, but hopefully it'll give you some really good insight into maybe where your current marketing strategy might be letting you down, and some quick fixes that you can do in order to turn that around. As always, any questions or comments, just leave them down below, and we can either address them while we're live, or we'll just come back to you at the end. And these recordings will be available to you once this session has finished. So if you're not able to stay for the entire session, don't worry, you'll be able to catch up on it on demand, either via our website or on YouTube as well. So you can see all of the back catalogue of all of our previous webinars as well. So shall we get straight into it, Andy? I know that we've got a lot to get through. So first of all, let's tackle these two mistakes. What are they? Why do we see them? Why is it important that we address them? Over to you.
Well, I think first of all, it's context, isn't it? That there aren't just two challenges. In 20 years of luxury retail, there are lots and lots of challenges that range from the before acquiring a customer right through to delivery and after the customer has been acquired. But typically there's two areas where we've noticed are most common. So some clients struggle with some operational areas more than others. Some struggle with the sort of acquisition of new customers, or managing existing customers, or raising LTVs or AOVs. But generally there's two things that most of the brands that can't grow but want to grow are struggling with, essentially. So first things first, it's in two parts, and it is a lack of storytelling and using creative assets to do that, basically. So what do I mean by that? So often growth comes from new customers, which is, we might come into some of the context of these points a bit later on, so I won't preempt that, but often new customers are not really interested in and don't respond well at all to seeing a pair of trainers or seeing some sandals or a coat, because there's a disconnect between what they are doing in it. For example, at that point in time on social, they're waiting to interact with friends, family, and the next minute they see a pair of shoes and they don't care. They're not in the space where they want to engage with the brand. Whereas most luxury brands, particularly, order values over 100 quid or $100, tend to just put products out there. So it disengages, essentially. So the first point is stop doing that and transition into more of delivering as a first message to a new customer why you exist, and even what your product does for them. Does it solve a pain point? Is it a particular piece of technical apparel that keeps you drier longer? Or, was the business set up specifically to keep people dry for longer? There's probably, you're the creative, not me, but there's probably a better way to phrase it. But the idea is that you connect with people that will carry your business beyond the revenue ceilings that you're experiencing or you're stuck at the minute. They are new customers, so tell them a little bit about you first. If you're looking to date and you go into a bar, you don't just sort of run straight up to the first person and say, can we get married tomorrow? It doesn't work that way. So try and court them a little bit, tell them a bit about who you are, why you exist. And then the second thing, which is not the second point, but if we're staying on the first point, that lack of storytelling, it's how brands use a specific type of asset and a variety of assets in order to deliver that story. So that's the first point. In terms of the creative assets, maybe it's probably better to bounce someone back to you, Danielle. So I know we've been doing lots of UGC stuff at the minute to help that storytelling, haven't we?
Yes, I think it's important to say that, there is definitely things that you can be doing that utilizes whatever creative you currently have. So if you are limited by budget, limited by time, limited by resource, and you think, well, we just don't have the capacity to go out and shoot loads of new content because, I don't know, perhaps you've just done it before watching this webinar, and you think, well, we can't go out again. There is absolutely uses for the current creative that you have, even if it's not entirely kind of what we would recommend. And what I mean by that is if you're just relying on photography, it's mainly what we see. It's not as much of a problem anymore, I think, as people start to kind of climb aboard the video train. But we have seen in the past kind of just a lot of stills and a lot of photography. And yes, photography can be incredibly emotional and you can tell a story through a photograph, but it is more difficult. And actually, when you're, as Andy mentioned, when you're a user, especially on social media, on the likes of TikTok, for instance, and you're not greeted with kind of fast moving or kind of video style content, the context within your ad, that your ad is sitting within, doesn't quite make sense. So it will immediately look like an ad. And I think as Instagram and Meta are starting to move more towards these kind of video first, so I know that there was a bit of an uproar when we were told that Instagram algorithm was going to start favoring videos and reels over showing grid photographs and photography. But if that's where we're leading, then we kind of need to think, okay, well, how do we need to adapt? So I would say as much variety as possible when it comes to the type of creative that you're creating. So yes, you need your e-com product shoots of your models in the studio, and you need those for your website, and you need them for your catalog ads and your PMAX shopping ads and your standard shopping ads, and that's amazing. You also need some kind of lifestyle photography, so showing the product in situ. So if you're a jewelry brand or an accessories brand that's catered for occasion wear, we want to be able to see that jewelry at an occasion, whether that be a wedding, a nightclub, a red carpet, something. We need to see it in situ where you are going to find it. And then in terms of video content, yes, have your campaign videos, so your kind of slick produced, you making videos every season when you release new collections. We need that for Instagram because it is still very much like people like shiny things. And then also, even for luxury brands, thinking about UGC or UGC style creative, and they're two very different things, because UGC is, getting those content creators to make things for you, and then UGC style, which you can still have control over, but it's just filmed in the way that someone at home would be able to film it. So I would always recommend behind the scenes for UGC style. So, taking advantage of the photo shoots that you're already doing and just putting a phone in somebody's hand and asking them to film as much behind the scenes as possible. Hair and makeup, lighting tests, getting stuff set up. If you're decorating a set, get videos of that, interview your models, just get as much as you can and then send it to a professional person to edit it if that's what you need to do. But that kind of UGC style works really well on platforms like TikTok, but you still have more creative control over how they look. And I think especially for luxury brands, what we're coming across is that they're really interested in this style of creative, but they still need it to adhere to brand guidelines. They still need it to feel very luxury. They don't want anything that necessarily looks really homemade. So I think it's about having a look at how you can still incorporate that same sensibility and that same kind of essence that you give off as a brand, but taking a look at actually, okay, well, what might my consumer be interested in beyond what the product looks like? And I think that's really important when you're looking at styles of creative.
And I think that's the biggest opportunity at the moment, particularly for luxury brands, is that UGC style and finding the balance. And we've had a number of conversations recently with clients that that are, very high order values, over $500, €500, £500 territory, and they're well-established brands over many years. And we're approaching them with a new style of asset that we want to build, and in many cases that we shoot for them. I know you've done a recent shoot for a client, and it really is quite different. And it's worth pressing towards this common, a sort of middle ground where the brand is happy and we're happy with that type of asset, because not many in the luxury space are doing it well. That whole UGC style.
I will point out a very recent campaign that I think is a really good example, and that is from Burberry. It's the campaign is a week old, if that, or at the time of this webinar, which is the end of October. Burberry did a shoot. Fair enough, they have the budget to be able to get Olivia Colman and Barry Keoghan and Cara Delevingne and all of these kind of very high-profile figures. So that's one aspect that you'll have to factor in. They asked them to make cups of tea, and it was really simple. They had like a big table out with a selection of mugs, different types of tea, different types of milk, sugar, whatever, and they just asked each of them to just like make a cup of tea, which is quintessentially British, and Burberry being a British brand, so it still ties into kind of what they mean as a brand. And then they just filmed it, and yes, it looks like they've been using kind of professional grade cameras and things, but that's not to say that you would need to. You could shoot that kind of content on a phone, and the engagement of those pieces of content has been huge, and all they're doing is making tea. So I think as much as there is a kind of stereotypical maybe viewpoint on what luxury content needs to be, and it needs to be shiny and kind of Oscar worthy, or it needs to look really stylish. Loewe also just released a load of new content for their new collection, again kind of with A-list profilers like actors, quite a lot of actors actually, that are very current, but they put them in like strange situations. So like Richard Gadd, who's an actor, he's like wearing his little Loewe outfit, and he's stood next to a farmer holding like a giant marrow, which, kind of is in keeping with their slightly alternative, slightly quirky Britishisms. Even though Loewe being a Spanish brand, but it doesn't matter. But it's like these brands are now really starting to think out of the box and think, what can we do that still reflects who we are as a brand and our personality, but is really going to put ourselves out there and differentiate us between the thousands of other designer brands who are currently just showing models walking down a runway or models in a studio. It's so interesting to see that even these huge brands are starting to adopt this slightly more slapdash, so to speak, style of content, and people are really, really enjoying it.
Well, you love the cinema. Do you remember the Blair Witch Project?
Yes, I do.
So if you remember the films that led up to that point in terms of how they were filmed, it was all very much through a very specific camera, similar look, similar filters used. Yes, the stories that were told were different, but in terms of how they were filmed was similar. And then all of a sudden you get Blair Witch, which was filmed almost on purpose in a very, very different way, almost first person, follow the actor's eyes around. And it won all sorts of awards, and it just needs somebody like that film to say, we want to do something different. And they took a steal on the market, and since then they've changed the way cinematographers are look at things. So I'm constantly testing new stuff. So you've got people like Loewe and other brands that are starting to, and Yves Saint Laurent as well, are starting to use their YouTube channel to be a little bit more sort of UGC style. But it is an opportunity for brands that might not be sort of 100 million brands, but those brands that are 1, 2, 3 million and above, that have a story and that want to tell something, but don't want to let the sort of reins go a little bit. It is a really, really good way to tell your story. And you've done some work recently on the sort of unpacking style, which is talk to the audience about that.
Unboxing started on YouTube, and it was exactly as it says on the tin. People would get packages and they would film themselves unboxing them. It's become a kind of a weird staple in influencer content. So there's loads of kind of any influencer really that's being sent PR packages. You'll see a let's unbox this together type situation, where all you're doing is just watching them open parcels, which seems so mundane, but people are really invested in seeing what these people are being sent. So that's one route that you could go down in terms of actually getting, forming a partnership with influencers that match your brand, and sending them PR, and you can have that kind of two-way relationship. Or you can mimic that same style, but you can film it yourself, and you can film it just with hands and a voiceover. If you don't want to get your face in it, or if you don't have maybe an employee or anyone that wants to necessarily get behind the camera, having something where it's filmed in such a way where you can just see people's hands and then you can kind of narrate over the top. We found that works really nicely. And it's just almost like bringing, the reason I think it works, I think, is psychological. And it's because I, as a watcher of that content, could then imagine myself receiving that package and opening it. And you almost get that same kind of gratification that you get when you get sent something new and you're excited and you open it and you can't wait to see what it looks like. And especially with luxury brands, the way that your items are packaged and parceled is really important. So are you using dust bags? Are they coming in boxes rather than like a bubble wrapped envelope? Are you leaving little cards that have got like signatures and things on them? Like what is that experience like? And what you want to do is make that experience as kind of desirable as possible, so that people watching that video will think, oh, that's what I would feel like if I ordered from you. And it creates that aspiration of a consumer receiving that from you. And I think that can be really powerful, and the reason why it has worked and actually continues to work kind of 2, 3, 4 years down the line from when it first started. So it's a very easy way, if you've got someone that's savvy with a phone and with a iMovie or the TikTok editor or anything, it's something that you could do in an afternoon.
Yeah.
So and it's also, it won't cost you very much at all, and it's a good way of being able to test whether or not that kind of content is going to resonate, because you could make something like that in an afternoon. You could throw a couple £100 behind it and see how it works, and then from there you can then decide whether you want to try and reinvest more into that style of content. So it's a good way of testing whether it's for you.
Which actually segues us nicely into point number 2. But before we get there, you've already alluded to this. You have to be a very, very, very good photographer to be able to tell a story from a still picture. And I agree, you can do it. And we have seen it before with many brands that we work with over many years. But you have to be really, really creatively skillful as a photographer, and not just somebody that takes good pictures. So whereas on the flip side, running something like you've mentioned in terms of a packing video or an unboxing video or something like that can be done in your own offices somewhere very simply, with no models, no special lighting necessarily, and get a way more engaged asset to be used in some testing, versus really trying to spend tens of thousands of pounds on the most prestigious visual storyteller of a photographer. So just one thing to sort of reiterate that you mentioned before, but you did segue us nicely, Danielle. It's almost like you've done this before.
I know.
It segued us nicely into the second point. So that was the first one, and just to recap on that first point was surrounding the lack of storytelling, and combined with the assets that help tell that brand story. So certainly first problem, or point number 1 when looking to grow for brands, is go back to that. Are you telling your story in your first point of interaction with your customer base or your new customer base. And if you aren't, then do some very, very quick different types of assets. So point number 2 is the lack of testing structure. So when we go in and audit these sort of many accounts as we do, or we have a look and support brands and trying to understand what the sort of strategy needs to be moving forward in order to grow beyond those classic growth ceilings of sort of 2 million, 5 million, 10 million and 20 million, we look at the structure of the accounts and see what sort of testing that they've done. And in most cases, there's very little testing that's actually gone on. And what I mean by that is that even with standard static images, there's normally not enough of those assets, not enough variety with enough copy that are on rotation automatically that give the user of that account the intelligence to say, actually, that seems to be working and that isn't. So just generally testing. Second of all, and I'll come on to the actual structure that works and the structure that doesn't work within something like Meta in a second. But second of all, what you can do is if you produce the likes of the UGC style videos that we discuss, and you produce multiple of them and include it in a campaign such as Advantage Plus Shopping, you can have all the assets that tell your story in an algorithmically driven campaign that will deliver to each stages of the buying funnel. So the sort of awareness and consideration stage right down to the sales stage that we call build, storytell, and sell, nice and simple. So it will deliver the assets automatically at each of the sequences that make most sense to the customers within the Meta network, for example, based on the feedback that algorithm's getting. And what it will do, the output of the data that you get is that you will understand which sequences are working. And so you can then go back out to your marketing teams and brand teams and say, do you know what, our audience, our actual audience are telling us that this visual is working. It likes to see a UGC style asset in the build stage. For storytelling, it likes to see a carousel that's led with, or a collection ad that's led with a hero image that also furthers on our story, but then introduces the product below in the sort of thumbnails, and then people tend to buy on this image. And you can then say, okay, well, if we know that works, then what other story sequences work? And so by constantly testing these on an ongoing basis, you constantly identify parts of the audience and stories that really resonate with them.
Yeah, and I think as well, just going back to kind of from a creative perspective, it's a lot of people think like, oh, when we test creative, it's got to be A versus B, and they're both two completely different things. So like, oh, well, we're going to test our campaign videos against our UGC, and then whichever one wins, which I don't think is the right way to go about it, because I think they both they both have their own uses, and they both are going to be influential in different ways. So, you know, a campaign video is going to be really good at introducing your brand to new people, people that have never heard of you before, and you know, it highlights your products in a really nice way. Most of the time they're shot outside or they're shot on location, and they, especially on Instagram and Meta, they work really well right at the very top in terms of telling your story. And then we find that actually UGC is really powerful in that kind of storytell phase where people are starting to shop around. They want some more, you know, people buy from people, so they want to see some kind of reviews or something that's a little bit more storytelling. And then obviously you've got like your catalog ads and everything at the bottom. So I would say when you're testing, don't pit, you know, a dog against a cat, because you'll end up switching something off that is probably working in some capacity to help you build revenue and acquire new customers over a longer time period. I cannot stress that enough, that it's not going to be a short-term thing. It's something that works over a longer time period. Yeah. So my advice would be, if you're serious about creative testing, you want to be comparing A1 against A2. So if you're taking a UGC video, make 2 different versions of that video, maybe with the first 4 seconds are different. So which hook works better than the other? You know, if you've got it even works with photo shoots. If you've got a photo shoot where you've got like a wide photo, and you get like this beautiful landscape in the background, does that work better than that same photograph where you're zoomed into a mid shot and you've got more? Do people want to see more product? Do they want to see more landscape? Doing little things like that might seem like it's kind of overkill, but actually it gives you really good insight in terms of planning your content going forward, because it tells you what people like and what works for you. And to measure that, you can look at ROAS, or we look at click-through rate, don't we, Andy, in terms of how powerful those pieces of creative or that copy variation is. We don't necessarily look at revenue, we look at click-through rate.
Yeah, and just 2 quick points, because I'll come on to the sort of measurements of what looks good for these tests and what doesn't look good for these tests. Just going back onto that, I'd mentioned a bit about the structure within Meta or TikTok, for example. What we're seeing as part of that point number 2, which is a lack of testing structure, we're also seeing incorrect structures by for most brands, not all brands, but again, we're trying to generalize a little bit here into sort of summing 20 years of experience into 2 points that are wrong. But in terms of the structure, what we see often is that there'll be a separate awareness campaign, then there's a separate conversion campaign, then there's a separate selling campaign. And typically, the systems within Meta or TikTok or any other Google Ads is exactly the same. They don't pin the 2 campaigns together. So they don't know that this is awareness that should be attached to your storytelling. So put them all in one group if you want to do testing for this purposes, because you've got to set goals. So if you have an awareness campaign, the goals are either reach or click. So what happens is Facebook and TikTok go, oh, okay, so you just want to get in front of lots of people quickly. There you go. So they'll give you a relatively high click-through rate, 300,000 impressions in 5 days, for hardly any money. And it looks like it's been successful. Look, we're getting in front of 300,000 people. But typically, there's a disconnect then between, okay, let's put some ads in front of them, between, right, we need to sell something now. So if you're going to do a test, make sure you do it under one ad structure, essentially, one campaign. And use, if it's Meta, use Advantage Plus Shopping, because it has all of those three tiers. Just some context, first of all. Why are these 2 things important? Why is that there's a lack of storytelling and the assets used for that? And why is a lack of testing a problem? Because true growth comes from new customers. It's people that don't know your brand and don't know your product and why it's important to them. And so often we see these e-commerce teams get to a growth ceiling and they're thinking, well, we've got a great product, the customer service is amazing, the aftercare is brilliant, we've got full circle sustainability, I don't know what's going on, why can't we get over 2 million, or why can't we get over 5 million? And typically it's because there isn't enough focus on what are we doing for new customers and are we connecting with them via our story versus just putting lots of ads in front of them. So context-wise, that's why it's important. There has to be a focus on new customers, basically.
I think, just to jump in there, just to add to that, I think, and I say this all the time, and I know that you touch upon it as well, is that not everyone's going to be in the market to buy your product immediately. Not everyone, it's just fact. So it's a long-term solution, because especially when you're in the luxury space and items are more expensive, there are going to be people on Meta that are going to be able to click a button and spend that amount of money without really thinking about it. But more often than not, we see that it's a slightly more considered purchase. So what you don't want to be doing is just constantly serving people shopping ads, because it doesn't, apart from the product and the look of the product, it's not memorable enough to be able, for someone to be able to recall it when they do become in the market for the product. So like if you're looking for a coat, for instance, it's quite seasonal, and they see your coat in August, by the time they come to buy a coat in October, when AW24 has been launched, all the new designer AW24 stuff's been launched, they're not going to remember who you are just by looking at an image, unless the product is so absolutely unbelievable that they've screenshotted it and they've remembered it. So it's good to bear that in mind, that you need to also be catering for people that aren't in the market for you right now, but might be in a few months' time.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the metrics I mentioned, so what we do when we engage with a new client, we will put them through what we call a new customer growth accelerator, which is identifying those 2 points or answering those 2 points. So looking at creating a story out of existing assets, maybe shooting some new assets, some new UGC style assets if there's a lack of that type of asset in there. And then we build that in a test structure, and we just pick on one channel. Meta is a good example. And we build that structure that I've just discussed, which is typically led by Advantage Plus Shopping, put all of those assets in and start to engage new customers only, so we can remove existing customers by uploading existing customer files and say, whatever you do, don't target these people, we want new people. And what we apply to that in terms of targets is we say a bare minimum of 3 times ROAS, and that's just for new customers. So if you think that sounds quite low and you normally get 5, that's because that's a blended ROAS, so people already know you versus new customers. 3 or 3.5 times ROAS is really strong for new customer only acquisition. And then we say, in terms of measuring those sequences of stories, successful story sequences will have an average of 1% click-through rate or higher. And we've seen stories with 3, 4, 5 times click-through to new customers. So that's how we approach it. We put people into a specific system that we call the Growth Accelerator, and that then gives us lots of data inside 30 days for us to then say, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Client, this is what the data's told us. Where do you want to be revenue-wise? What we want to be at X million? Okay, right, this is the way to go. And we base that on real data rather than kind of going, we're going to charge you this, and we might get there, we might not. So they're the 2 metrics. Got to be a minimum 3 times ROAS. You've got to put them in this testing system, and you're looking for those stories to give you a feedback of 1% or more CTR.
And just quickly, what kind of results have we seen off the back of this when we've been doing this for clients?
It varies between 5 and 6 times ROAS, and the highest we've got is 15 times ROAS inside 30 days.
Well, so actually, inside 14 days, if we want to be.
Sorry, 14 days, yeah.
You know, we can go anywhere from 3 times ROAS over 30 days to 15 times within 15 days. You know, with varying factors affecting those kind of that metric, but as Andy said, it's a really good way of being able to gather a lot of information about what is going to work for you going forward within a very short time period. And then the benefit of that is that you're going to acquire new customers and you're going to get revenue from it. But aside from it being kind of a revenue exercise, it does give you a lot of data that you can then start using when it comes to planning new content, or, you know, how you want to write your copy going forward, you know, what resonates better with your audience, so that you can start moving that across maybe some of your other channels. And we can also do it on brand new channels that you've never thought about using before, which is another benefit if you're looking at introducing a new channel into your mix. This is also something that can work. It's a 30-day test on a new channel to see what the viability is for that to be able to improve revenue over a longer term basis, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, we've edged over 30 minutes a little, but hopefully that's been helpful for everyone, just to give you a taste in terms of what you can be doing on an ongoing basis to try and optimize your marketing and e-commerce strategy. As always, please let us know if you have any questions. You can find both of us on LinkedIn, so feel free to send us messages or drop us a note on our website or via email at info@revenuegrowth.agency. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.